As Pastor said, my name is Mark Robbins. I usually attend the 8:30 service. I attend the 10 o'clock service when I'm usually given tasks or assignments. Most of the time that's ushering, but today, as Pastor said, I've been asked to give a temple talk on stewardship. A talk I gave about 5 years ago in a completely different setting and different times for this congregation. What is stewardship? Now, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines it as the conducting, supervising, or managing of something, especially the careful, responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. Synonyms include administration, control, governance, handling, management, and operation. I consider stewardship to be one of the 4 relationship pillars of the Christian faith. And this isn't found in any theology, this is just my observation. The first is faith, our relationship with God, with Christ. The second is fellowship, our relationship with each other. The third is evangelism, which is our relationship with those outside the church. And fourth is stewardship, our relationship with and responsibilities to the stuff that gives us a home, the church. And what are we stewards of? We're stewards of a congregation that's 250 years old, of a sanctuary that's 105 years old. Think about that. That's a pretty impressive number, 250, when you consider that the country is only 243 years old. We've existed as a congregation for half of the Protestant Reformation. That's amazing. Now, this congregation has faced many existential tests over its history. The loss of several of the actual physical churches on this very site, the constant change of demographics which remake the face of a church every generation, scandals which in retrospect are mere tempests in teapots, and then most recently, of course, the IRS leak. But one of the most interesting and fascinating tests this congregation faced was early in its history, although it was 60 years roughly after the congregation had been established, so many churches in this day and age aren't even 60 years old. The property that we are on right now was owned by Colonel Charles Beatty. In 1769, he decided that he would develop the land, and he divided it into plots, and it was adjacent to the village port of Georgetown, Maryland. And as he divided up the lots, according to the Supreme Court opinion, and by the way, what I'm going to be reading from is the United States Supreme Court decision. For those of you who are lawyers, it's Beatty and Ritchie versus Kurtz and trustees of the German Lutheran Church of Georgetown. The site is 27 U.S. 566, 1829. And what, according to the opinion, Beatty distinguished and set apart a certain lot or portion of ground in the said addition to the village of Georgetown for the sole use and benefit of the German Lutheran Church, declaring the same to be their absolute right and property, to be held by them for religious purposes. That's a covenant in the deed, in the grant deed. We had to keep this place religious in nature. Well, Colonel Beatty died in 1813, and his heirs immediately turned their attention to his estate. And the church that had been built up here, a log cabin, they had erected a bell steeple, had fallen into disrepair. And as the Supreme Court case goes on to say, the Lutherans have constituted but a small number in the town of Georgetown. They have not been able, therefore, to maintain public worship constantly in the house so erected during the whole period, and sometimes it has been intermittent for a considerable length of time. But efforts have been constantly made, as far as practicable, to keep together a congregation, to use the means of divine worship, and to support public preaching. The house, however, in consequence of inevitable decay, fell down some time ago, the exact period of which, however, does not appear, but it seems to have been almost for 40 years. Efforts have since been made to rebuild it, but hitherto they have not been successful. So the congregation didn't have a church, but it did have a cemetery, which is where our fellowship hall is now, and Lutherans were buried there. And the congregation at least had a sexton whose job was to keep the cemetery clean, build a fence around it, keep the headstones up and all of that. And when the heirs of Beatty tried to repossess the land granted to the Georgetown Lutheran Church, they argued that because there was no church, because there were no services, that the covenant had been broken, that we weren't using it for religious purposes. But the court, the Supreme Court, said the land was originally consecrated for religious purpose. It has become a depository of the dead, and it cannot now be resumed by the heirs of Colonel Charles Beatty. So think of that. The job of stewards is to hand intact that which they've been entrusted to the next generation. We owe our existence right now to the dead brothers and sisters who were buried on our property. So as we move forward in this year of celebration of our history, let us recommit ourselves as a congregation to be stewards of that which we've been entrusted to. This is going to take time, it takes energy, it takes effort, it will take money. Old buildings need assistance. But let's move forward. Let's move forward confident in what we are as a congregation in the bigger church. Let's move forward confident in our role here in Georgetown and in our relationships with each other. Thank you.